to Daring Dialogues, Black Table Talk Edition. We are talking about the life of Malcolm, Martin, and Medgar, and we are focused in on that for the month of May. So if you want to follow along, you can follow the hashtag Malcolm Martin Medgar May or Malcolm Medgar Martin May, either one of those hashtags. And we started out last Monday talking about Malcolm and his letter to the grassroots. And we're going to backtrack for a moment because I want to introduce you to two more books that we'll be reading from that I will be creating some conversation and dialogue around for the month of May. You may see some memes that come up with quotes from these books. And so let me start by introducing you. And we're going to be reading some of the intros today. This one, Medgar and Merle, is probably the most recent and more comprehensive study on the life of Medgar, taken from his own wife's perspective. So we're going to start here today. Then we're going to go back to the book Malcolm Speaks, and we're going to finish up his letter to the grassroots here in the book. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what that actually meant for Black people and whether or not we have learned those lessons that Malcolm was trying to share with us. And then we're going to wrap it up with Strength to Love. We'll be reading what Coretta Scott King had to say about her husband's messages and sermons. All right. So that's where we'll go today. All right. So let's get started because there is quite a bit of reading to do. And then we're going to wrap this up with our talk back. Our talk back, hopefully, is going to be held today on our YouTube channel. So if you're not following us there, if you want to stay around for the talk back, this broadcast will continue on YouTube. My YouTube channel is at Life Nation KC, all one word, Life Nation KC. And you can join us over there for the talk back. All right. This is the prologue to this book. Good morning. Merle Evers said this about her husband, Medgar. I don't know what to say except that Medgar was the love of my life. The thing about love is that it has no chill. It takes no prisoners and makes no exceptions for the times or the environment or the dangers ahead. It has no situational awareness, particularly when it is true and intense and existential. At its best, it is fearless. Love is why this book is. In the 1950s, Merle Louise Beasley fell inextricably in love with Medgar Wiley Evers. She loved him the moment she laid eyes on him on her first day at Alcorn A&M College, later Alcorn State University, though at the time she wouldn't dare admit it. She was 17 years old and intended to major in education with a minor in music after being part of a locally famous girls' singing group in high school. She was talented enough as a singer and pianist that her grandmother and aunt, who had raised her after plucking her out of the arms and home of her teenage mother, were certain that one day she might play in New York's famous Carnegie Hall, despite her being a brown-skinned Black girl from segregated Vicksburg, Mississippi. At Alcorn, Merle pledged the historically Black sorority Delta Sigma Theta, and she was driven to succeed by her grandmother and her namesake, Aunt Merle, despite the ugly realities of her state and country. Medgar was 25 years old, a tall, dark, handsome football player and World War II veteran. He and his elder brother Charles had what you might call attitude, which back then was risky for Black men in the South. Medgar had taken risks to register to vote, and he carried himself with a confidence and keen sense of dignity he knew he was owed by the country he had defended against the Nazis in Europe. He believed in himself and what his education ought to bring him as a man in Mississippi. Medgar, to put it mildly, made an impression on the 17-year-old black girl from Vicksburg. Despite her family's determination that Merle focus on her education before matters of the heart, love turned her head. Medgar and Merle married a year after they met on Christmas Eve, 1951. They embarked on a perilous, often contentious romantic journey that got swept up in Mississippi's civil rights struggle and ended in blood, tears, and a woman's quest, not just for justice, but for vengeance. This book is first and foremost a love story. It is not just about the love between two Black people in Mississippi and their love for their children. It is also about the higher love it took for Black Americans to love America and to fight for it, even in the state that butchered more Black bodies via lynching than any other, and that ripped apart the promise of Reconstruction with a ferocity unmatched by any other place in this fragile and fractured nation. Despite all of that, Medgar Evers had a deep and unfaltering love for Mississippi. He loved its pastoral plains, its deep rivers, and wooded areas where he would fish and hunt and feed his family with his physical labor. His love for the Black farmers and maids and butlers and strivers of this tormented state gave his life meaning. Merle Evers demanded more than once that Medgar tell her if he loved her and his children more than his work. He pressed her to understand that he did his work because he loved her and their children. He didn't want them to live as he did, growing up walking by the bloody clothes of a lynched Black man on his way to school and seeing Black men and women abused and disrespected as a daily fact of life. He was determined to exorcise the ghosts in the trees that whispered to him and his brother that in Mississippi and throughout America, people like them were something less than human. Medgar's work was a labor of love. Francis H. Mitchell, in his November 1958 profile of Medgar for Ebony, noted a plaque hanging on the living room wall of the Evers home in Jackson. It was a quote from President Abraham Lincoln that for Mitchell, a groundbreaking figure as a Black photographer and journalist of that era, seemed to sum up Medgar's relationship with his God and with the white man at the same moment. Lincoln's words on the plaque were published in Harper's Weekly in July 1865, 3 months after his assassination. It said, I have been driven many times to my knees by the overwhelming conviction that I had nowhere else to go. My own wisdom and that of all about me seemed insufficient for that day. James Baldwin, the eminent Black American author, met Medgar Evers shortly after New Year's Day in 1963 as Baldwin embarked on a lecture tour throughout the American South for the Congress on Racial Equality. In response to the violent riots that accompanied James Meredith's integration of the University of Mississippi months before, Meredith's bid to enter Ole Miss had been backed by Medgar, who had himself been rejected by the state's premier college simply because he was Black. Baldwin quickly became close to Medgar and decades later recalled him as a great man, a beautiful man, and a troublemaker, in the way that Baldwin respected and that he possessed, quote, the calm of someone who knows they're going to die before their time, like Martin Luther King, end quote. Baldwin returned to the United States from self-exile in Paris in 1957 and dove into civil rights. He befriended each of the three men he declared to be the core triumvirate of the movement, Dr. King, Malcolm X, and Medgar. All three were troublemakers in the eyes of the racist white Southern establishment and the federal government, particularly the FBI, which also kept a file on Baldwin. Medgar would be the first to meet the fate that the eminent author had perceived as all but inevitable. In the early morning hours of June 12, 1963, Medgar Evers was shot in the carport of his home in Jackson, Mississippi, by an assassin with links to Mississippi's White Citizens Council and the Ku Klux Klan. Medgar was just 37 years old. It should be noted here that Medgar, Malcolm, nor Martin lived to see their 40th birthday. Myrlie, who was only 30, became the widowed single mother of 3 young children. So when I hear the term single mother, I'm very keen and very aware that America has made more widowed single mothers than a little. The frightened and despondent Myrlie, but determined author of her martyred husband's legacy. Love had made Myrlie put up with the fear and dread that came with being the wife of a civil rights leader who was continually on the hit list of the Mississippi Klan and hated by every racist in the state, Kluxer or not. Love made her put up with the threatening phone calls and the terror her children endured as they learned to drop to the floor if they heard gunshots and to hide in the bathtub if the bad men came for their daddy. And love would make Myrlie pick herself up off the bloody pavement where Medgar lay dying and turn her screams and rage into a determination to hunt the killer for decades until she got justice for her slain husband and her family. Evers' assassination came amid a national torrent of civil rights demonstrations, sit-ins, federal troops-backed college desegregations, and demands from Black demonstrators across the South for an immediate end to Jim Crow segregation. As the highest profile civil rights leader at that time to be killed in an act of racist violence, he soon became a national household name. News of Evers' assassination 2 years before the murder of Malcolm X in Harlem and 5 years before King was cut down in Memphis was splashed across the front pages of the country's newspapers from Shreveport, Louisiana, and Waterloo, Iowa, to Portland, Maine, and Stockton, California. Officials from Jackson, Mississippi, and Washington, D.C. expressed shock and outrage. Many feared mass racial violence in Jackson as police arrested anyone attempting to march in mourning or in protest, including 14 mostly Black clergy and church laymen. So, arresting religious clergy is on brand for America, okay? What we saw in Minnesota is on brand for America. They were doing it during the civil rights movement as well. They arrested 14 Black clergy mainly and a church layman, plus 146 protesters during a tense and angry June 12th march through downtown Jackson protesting the murder. As far away as New Jersey, NAACP activists shifted their plans for a July 2nd civil rights march in the wake of the slaying, with the Rockland County NAACP president issuing a statement saying, quote, "The Negroes in Rockland County can no longer sit back and calmly watch the acts of barbarism against their brothers in the South." Okay. A statement from the White House declared that President John F. Kennedy, who within months would also fall to an assassin's bullet, was appalled by the barbarity of the Evers murder. Kennedy called former President Eisenhower to the White House the day after the assassination to discuss the urgency of the country's 10th racial problem. But they want you to be convinced in 2026 that we still don't have a 10th racial problem. Mhm. They were joined by Vice President Johnson and Attorney General Robert Kennedy, excuse me, who said he was saddened and shocked by the killing and announced that the FBI would begin a full federal investigation. King and his deputies were galvanized by the Evers killing as they planned an August march on Washington at which Myrlie Evers was to be among the few women slated to speak. Yet today, much of that historical memory has vanished, which is why I'm reading it aloud for you so it will get back into the historical record. When Oprah Daily, the Hearst publication and website launched by Oprah Winfrey, published its list of 30 civil rights leaders of the past and present in February of 2023, they named many of the movement's luminaries, such as King and Malcolm, W.E.B. Du Bois, Julian Bond, A. Philip Randolph, Ella Baker, and Roy Wilkins. Medgar Evers wasn't even on the list. Likewise, PBS's 2013 catalog of civil rights heroes included the great Daisy Bates and Ralph Bunche, along with Chicago's legendary activist Fred Hampton and the more familiar names Martin, Malcolm, Rosa Parks, John Lewis, but not Medgar. This in part because Medgar assassination was followed and quickly overshadowed by so many momentous events. There was a lot going on in 1963. The March on Washington, the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing that killed 4 little girls, the 1964 Freedom Summer protests throughout Mississippi, which were built on the youth activism Medgar erected through the NAACP youth councils, the disappearance of 3 civil rights workers in rural Mississippi, and the discovery that they had been killed by the Klan, and Fannie Lou Hamer and the Mississippi Freedom Democrats' disruption of the 1964 Democratic Convention, because it looks like the Democrats need another disruption of their conventions. Not long after that, Malcolm X was killed in New York and Dr. King in Memphis, each man cut down in the prime of his life. The era also saw the assassinations of President Kennedy and Robert Kennedy, characterizing it by so much violence and death. We sometimes struggle to sort through it all and preserve a comprehensive historical memory. The fundamental argument of this work is that Medgar's activism, from his role in investigating the Emmett Till lynching and other racist murders of Black Mississippians, to the boycott movement he orchestrated in Jackson, was the foundation upon which the later efforts by SNCC, CORE, and other organizations were built. James Baldwin had it right. Medgar Evers deserves a place alongside Malcolm X and Dr. King in our historical memory as contemporaries who fought the same demons of white supremacy during the same perilous era, often with overlapping tactics. Now, I'm glad that she said this because this is one of the reasons why I am doing this study on the 3, because that revelation came to me in my own prayer time that those 3 were united and sometimes their tactics overlapped, and that their work is not finished, and that there is a generation, not just a singular person, but a generation that is going to complete their work. Medgar Evers, with Myrlie as his partner in activism and in life, was doing civil rights work in the single most hostile and dangerous environment in America, Mississippi. Among other things, this book is a love letter to Myrlie Evers Williams, who I came to know and admire as a woman, a sorority sister, civil rights leader, an icon in her own right. Her independence, her fighting spirit, and determination make her as captivating a figure as there is in American history. Her deep, resonant voice is almost musical, appropriate given her gifts at the piano. Her fierce love for her children, grandchildren, great grandchildren is inspiring, as were her determination to find love again and build a new life for her family in California. I recorded more than a half dozen interviews with Miss Evers Williams over the course of nearly a year by telephone and in person. This book extensively uses her words, her memories, her stories, along with interviews with family, friends, and neighbors of the Evers during the time they lived on Guine Street in Jackson, Mississippi. Historians from the Mississippi Delta community they resided in during their early marriage, and nearly a dozen men and women who, as young activists, were influenced by and allied with Medgar. I've also drawn from Evers Williams' two autobiographies, the autobiography of Medgar Evers and the other reference materials, including family archives at the Evers Institute in Jackson. Throughout this book, I refer to Medgar Evers and Myrlie Evers Williams as Medgar and Myrlie. Like all African American men and women, they deserve and always have deserved the honorific titles of Mr. and Miss. A similar tack is taken in describing their friendship and close relationships. The shorthand is meant to convey the love that this story has in its purest form, and not to take away any reverence from any historical figure and dignity of their lives. The term Negro is occasionally used throughout the book to convey the way Black Americans were referring to themselves and to the events described. And to the extent possible, the stories in this book are told through the voices of the people who lived them. So that is the introduction, and we'll be making our way through excerpts from this book. Um, I will be reading the book in whole, but I'll be sharing excerpts with you. I highly recommend that you get it if you want to learn more about Medgar's life and Medgar's role in the movement. Now, let's get back to where we were last week as we wrap up Malcolm X's speech, letter, message to the grassroots. Again, was delivered November 1963, and in this message to the grassroots, Malcolm is leveling some of his harshest criticisms at at the movement of nonviolence. I read a quote last night, and I think that that quote sort of sums up what a lot of people feel about them. And that was by the time they died, Malcolm had become Martin, and Martin had become Malcolm. I think that's a very profound statement. And so in this letter, Malcolm X is detailing the need for Black Americans to unite, to discard their petty differences, to learn how to fight a common enemy, and that common enemy is white oppression. And anyone who undergirds that oppression. So he's really talking about an idea, a concept that literally can run through anybody. And I think in 2026, I think people are starting to understand that. I often call it pseudo supremacy moving through a body, whether that body is Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, whatever. It's an ideology that is moving through a person, and that is what you're supposed to be opposing. Not all white people, but definitely the ones whose body is used for white oppression. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So he was telling them in this letter about fighting this common enemy, this ideology, through a genuine global revolution. He was advocating for a love of self and a love of each other and the need for self-defense. In this message, he also sort of details the difference between the house Negro and the field Negro, and he begins to critique the leadership for the March on Washington. So we are kind of right in the throes of Malcolm talking about what he feels revolution is. And he's talking about the difference between a Black revolution versus the Negro revolution. We continue today with his statements. He says, revolution is bloody. Revolution is hostile. Revolution knows no compromise. Revolution overturns and destroys everything that gets in its way. And you sitting around here like a knot on the wall saying, I'm going to love these folks no matter how much they hate me. No, you need a revolution. Whoever heard of a revolution where they lock arms, as Reverend Cleage was pointing out beautifully, singing, We shall overcome? You don't do that in a revolution. You don't do any singing. You're too busy swinging. It's based on land. A revolutionary wants land so he can get up and set up his own nation, an independent nation. These Negroes aren't asking for any nation. They're trying to crawl back on the plantation. When you want a nation, that's called nationalism. When the white man became involved in a revolution in his country against England, what was it for? He wanted this land so he could set up another white nation. That's white nationalism. The American Revolution was white nationalism. The French Revolution was white nationalism. The Russian Revolution, too, yes, it was white nationalism. You don't think so? Why do you think Khrushchev and Mao can't get their heads together? White nationalism. All the revolutions that are going on in Asia and Africa today are based on what? Black nationalism. A revolutionary is a Black nationalist. He wants a nation. I was reading some beautiful words by Reverend Cleage pointing out why he couldn't get together with someone else in the city because all of them were afraid of being identified with Black nationalism. If you're afraid of Black nationalism, you're afraid of revolution. And if you love revolution, you love Black nationalism. To understand this, you have to go back to what the young brother here referred to as the house Negro and the field Negro back during slavery. There were two kinds of enslaved, the house Negro and the field Negro. The house Negroes, they lived in the house with master, they dressed pretty good, they ate good food because they ate his food or what he left. They lived in the attic or the basement, but they still lived near the master. And they loved the master more than the master loved himself. They would give their life to save the master's house quicker than the master would. If the master said, We got a good house here, the house Negro would say, Yeah, we got a good house here. Whenever the master said we, he said we. And that's how you can tell a house Negro. Now let me take a sip on that. Mm. If the master's house caught on fire, the house Negro would fight harder to put the blaze out than the master would. If the master got sick, the house Negro would say, What's the matter, boss? We sick? We sick? He identified himself with his master more than his master identified with himself. And if you came to the house Negro and said, Let's run away, let's escape, let's separate, the house Negro would look at you and say, Man, you crazy. What you mean separate? Where is there a better house than this? Where can I wear better clothes than this? Where can I eat better food than this? That was the house Negro. In those days, he was called a house, Nigger. And that's what we call him today because we've still got some running around here. This modern house Negro loves his master. He wants to live near him. He'll pay 3 times as much as the house is worth just to live near his master. And then brag about, I'm the only Negro out here. I'm the only one on my job. I'm the only one in this school. You're nothing but a house Negro. And if someone comes to you right now and says, Let's separate, you say the same thing that the house Negro said on the plantation. What you mean separate? From America, this good white man? Where are you going to get a better job than you get here? I mean, this is what you say. I ain't left nothing in Africa. That's what you say. Why? You left your mind in Africa. On that same plantation, there was the field Negro. The field Negroes, those were the masses. There was always more Negroes in the field than there were Negroes in the house. The Negro in the field caught hell. He ate leftovers. In the house, they ate high up on the hog. The Negro in the field didn't get anything but what was left of the insides of the hog. They call it chitlins nowadays. In those days, they called them what they were, guts. That's what you were, gut eaters. And some of you are still gut eaters. The field Negro was beaten from morning to night. He lived in a shack, in a hut. He wore old cast off clothes. He hated his master. I say he hated his master. He was intelligent. That house Negro loved his master, but that field Negro, remember, they were in the majority and they hated the master. When the house caught on fire, he didn't try to put it out. That field Negro was praying for a wind, for a breeze. When the master got sick, the field Negro prayed that he would die. If someone came to the field Negro and said, let's separate, let's run, he didn't say, where are we going? He'd say, any place is better than here. You've got field Negroes in America today. I'm a field Negro. The masses are field Negroes. When they see this man's house on fire, you don't hear the little Negroes talking about our government is in trouble. They say the government is in trouble. Imagine a Negro, our government. I even heard one say, our astronauts. They won't even let him near the plant. And he says, our astronauts, our Navy. That's a Negro that is out of his mind. Just as the slave master of that day used Tom, the house Negro, to keep field Negroes in check, the same old slave master today has Negroes who are nothing but modern day, 20th century, to keep you and me in check, to keep us under control, to keep us passive and peaceful and nonviolent. That's being made nonviolent. It's like when you go to the dentist and a man's going to take out your tooth. You're going to fight him when he starts pulling. So he squirts some stuff in your jaw called Novocaine to make you think they're not doing anything to you. So you sit there, and because you've got all that Novocaine in your jaw, you suffer peacefully. Blood running all down your jaw, and you don't know what's happening because someone has taught you to suffer peacefully. The white man does the same thing to you in the street when he wants to put knots on your head and take advantage of you and not have you be afraid of your fighting back. To keep you from fighting back, he gets these old religious ones to teach you and me, just like Novocaine, to suffer peacefully. Don't stop suffering, just suffer peacefully. As Reverend Cleach pointed out, they say you should let your blood flow in the streets. This is a shame. You know he's a Christian preacher. If it's a shame to him, you know what it is to me. There's nothing in our book, the Quran, that teaches us to suffer peacefully. Our religion teaches us to be intelligent, be peaceful, be courteous, obey the law, respect everyone. But if someone puts his hand on you, send him to the cemetery. That's a good religion. In fact, that's that old time religion. That's the one that Ma and Pa used to talk about. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a head for a head, and a life for a life. And nobody resents that kind of religion being taught but a wolf who intends to make you his meal. This is the way it is with the white man in America. He's a wolf and you're a sheep. Anytime a shepherd, a pastor, teaches you and me not to run from the white man and at the same time teaches us not to fight the white man, he's a traitor to you and me. Don't lay down a life all by itself. No. Preserve your life. It's the best thing you've got. And if you got to give it up, let it be an even Steven. The slave master took Tom and dressed him well, fed him well, and even gave him a little education. A little education. Gave him a long coat and a top hat and made all the other ones look up to him. Then he used Tom to control them. The same strategy that was used in those days is used today by the same white man. He takes a Negro, a so-called Negro, and makes him prominent, builds him up, publicizes him, makes him a celebrity, and then he becomes a spokesman for Negroes and a Negro leader. I would like to mention just one other thing quickly, and that is the method that the white man uses, how the white man uses the big guns or Negro leaders against the Negro Revolution. They are not a part of the Negro Revolution, they are used against the Negro Revolution. When Martin Luther King failed to desegregate Albany, Georgia, the civil rights struggle in America reached its low point. King became bankrupt almost as a leader. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference was in financial trouble, and it was in trouble, period. with the people when they failed to desegregate Albany, Georgia. No other Negro civil rights leaders of the so-called national stature became fallen idols. As they became fallen and began to lose their prestige and influence, local Negro leaders began to stir up the masses. In Cambridge, Maryland, Gloria Richardson, in Danville, Virginia, and other parts of the country, local leaders began to stir up our people at the grassroots level. This was never done by these of national stature. They control you, but they have never incited you or excited you. They control you, they contain you, they've kept you on the plantation. As soon as King failed in Birmingham, Negroes took to the streets. King went out to California to a big rally and raised, I don't know how many thousands of dollars. He came to Detroit and had a march and raised some more thousands of dollars. And recall, right after that, Roy Wilkins attacked King. He accused King and CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, of starting trouble everywhere and then making the NAACP get them out of jail and spend a lot of money and not paying it back. This happened. I've got it in documented evidence in the newspaper. Roy started attacking King, and King started attacking Roy, and farmers started attacking both of them. And as these Negroes of national stature began to attack each other, they began to lose their control of the Negro masses. The Negroes were out there in the streets. They were talking about how they were going to march on Washington. Right at that time, Birmingham had exploded, and the Negroes in Birmingham, remember, they also exploded. They began to stab white people in the back and bust them upside their heads. Yes, they did. That's when Kennedy sent in the troops down in Birmingham. After that, Kennedy got on television and said, this is a moral issue. That's when he said he was going to put out a civil rights bill. And when he mentioned civil rights bill and the Southern started talking about it, how they were going to boycott or filibuster it, then the Negroes started talking about what? That they were going to march on Washington, march on the Senate, march on the White House, march on the Congress, and tie it up, bring it to a halt, not let the government proceed. They even said they were going out to the airport and laying down in the runway to not let any airplanes land. I'm telling you what they said. That was revolution. That was the Black Revolution. You see, Black people were becoming violent. They were beginning to attack white people in the streets. And they had decided that they were going to march on Washington. It was the grassroots out there in the street. This scared the white man to death, scared the white power structure in Washington, D.C. to death. I was there. When they found out that this Black steamroller was coming down to the Capitol, they called in Wilkins and they called in A. Philip Randolph. They called in the national Negro leaders that you respect and told them to call it off. Kennedy said, look, you all are letting this thing go too far. And old Tom said, boss, I can't stop it because I didn't start it. I'm telling you what they said. They said, I'm not even in it, much less at the head of it. These Negroes are doing things on their own. They're running ahead of us. And that old shrewd fox said, if you all aren't in it, I'll put you in it. I'll put you at the head of it. I'll endorse it. I'll welcome it. I'll help it. I'll join it. A matter of hours went by. They had a meeting at the Carlisle Hotel in New York City. The Carlisle Hotel is owned by the Kennedy family. That's the hotel Kennedy spent the night at 2 nights ago. It belongs to his family. A philanthropic society headed by a white man named Stephen Currier called all the top civil rights leaders together at the Carlisle Hotel. And he told them, by you all fighting each other, you are destroying the civil rights movement. And since you're fighting over money from white liberals, let us set up what is known as the Council for United Civil Rights Leadership. Let's form this council, and all the civil rights organizations will belong to it, and we'll use it for fundraising purposes. Let me show you how tricky the white man is. As soon as they got it formed, they elected Whitney Young as its chairman, and who do you think became the co-chairman? Stephen Currier, the white man, a millionaire. Powell was talking about it down at Cobo Hall today. This is what he was talking about. Powell knows what happened. He knows how it happened. Randolph knows what happened. Wilkins knows what happened. King knows what happened. Every one of that big six, they know what happened. Once they formed it and the white man was over it, he promised them and gave them $800,000 to split up among the big six, and told them that after the march was over, they'd give them 700,000 more. $1.5 million split up between leaders that you have been following, going to jail for, crying tears for, and they're nothing but Frank James and Jesse James, and what do you call them, brothers? As soon as they got the setup organized, the white man made available to them top public relations experts. They opened the news media across the country at their disposal, which then began to project these big six as the leaders of the march. Originally, they weren't even in the march. You were talking this march talk on Hastings Street. You were talking the march talk on Lenox Avenue and on Fillmore Street and on Central Avenue and 32nd Street and 63rd Street. That's where the march was being talked. But the white man put the big six at the head of it, made them the march. They became the march. They took it over. And the first move they made after they took it over, they invited Walter Reuther. They invited a priest, a rabbi, and an older white preacher. The same white element that put Kennedy into power, labor, the Catholics, the Jews, the liberal Protestants, the same clique that put Kennedy in power joined the march on Washington. It's just like when you got some coffee that's too black, which means you're too strong. What do? You integrate it with cream, you make it weak. But if you pour too much cream in it, you won't even know you ever had coffee. It used to be hot, it becomes cool. It used to be strong, it becomes weak. It used to wake you up, now it puts you to sleep. This is what they did with the March on Washington. They joined it. They didn't integrate it, they infiltrated it. They joined it, became a part of it, took it over. And as they took it over, it lost its militancy. It ceased to be angry. It ceased to be hot. It ceased to be uncompromising. Why, it even ceased to be a march. It became a picnic, a circus. Nothing but a circus with clowns and all. You had one right here in Detroit. I saw it on television with clowns leading it. White clowns and black clowns. I know you don't like what I'm saying, but I'm going to tell you anyway because I can prove what I'm saying. If you think I'm telling you wrong, you bring me Martin Luther King and A. Philip Randolph and James Farmer and those other three and see if they'll deny it over a microphone. No, it was a sellout. It was a takeover. When James Baldwin came in from Paris, they wouldn't let him talk because they couldn't make him go by the script. Burt Lancaster read the speech that Baldwin was supposed to make. They would not let Baldwin get up there because they know Baldwin is liable to say anything. They controlled it so tight. They told those Negroes what time to hit town, how to come, where to stop, what signs to carry, what songs to sing, what speech they could make, and what speech they couldn't make. And then they told them to get out of town by sundown. And every one of those was out of town by sundown. Now, I know you don't like my saying this, but I can back it up. It was a circus, a performance that beat anything Hollywood could ever do, the performance of the year. Ruther and all those other three devils should get an Academy Award for the best actors because they acted like they really loved Negroes and fooled a whole lot of them. And the six Negro leaders should get an award too for the best supporting cast. Now, so I don't know what your views are on the March on Washington, but that's what Malcolm had to say about it. And so I did a little bit of digging and I asked the question, how much of what Martin was saying was true? I mean, Malcolm, excuse me, Malcolm was saying was true. Um, he said, he has this is a huge critique of leadership at the time, that the March on Washington was co opted and managed by white political leaders. Now, do you think that people wanted that message to go further than Malcolm X's mouth? See, let's start thinking about why they would have assassinated Malcolm first. I just want us to sit in that for a moment. Why would they have assassinated Malcolm first? Because if Malcolm was alerting people to the fact that the people who were generally being followed were essentially being co-opted by the white power structures behind the scenes, and they were being paid to make the protest less revolutionary, that would have posed a problem. That would have posed a large, huge problem. That, wait a minute, these people are taking monies to make this less revolutionary. And the fact that he said that they weren't even initially a part of it, but that this was a groundswell of the people making a decision. You know, kind of like the groundswell of what happened with George Floyd. And then it began to sort of take on this more politicized, more capital minded move, right? Where white power structures began to come in to sort of quiet and settle the movement, the George Floyd protest movement down by making these pledges, right? Of, we're going to give you guys this money. We're going to invest in Black people. We really care, right? They pretended to care for about 3-4 years. And the other way that I see this shaping up is the same thing with these No Kings rallies. Some of y'all need to go and look at who is leading the No Kings rallies. Now, I'm not going to tell you to stop going, but as Malcolm said, what was supposed to be a march, by the time these people got involved in it, it had ceased to be a march. It went from being a march to a picnic. And you can literally see the footage from the March on Washington to see that that's what it looked like. It didn't look like people were, it looked like people were chilling. It looked like people were sitting out at the reflection pool, listening to the speeches. They had to calm that down. There was a different kind of energy that was coming toward Washington, and they had to slow that energy down. So let's look at some of the truths of what he was sharing. The question, he said, can you really have a revolution without some bloodshed? The truth is, global revolutions were rarely nonviolent. And what was happening with the march in Martin Luther King, right, is that it was essentially acting more like reform than revolution. And because it acted more of reform than revolution, here we are in 2026 with a group of people now leading the nation yet again who are unreforming the nation because they never wanted reform in the first place. They didn't want equality, period. And so rather than revolution, Black Americans settled for reform, and reform, as we can see, can be undone. All right. So the other truth, was the march being co-opted? Historians now can tell you that yes. There are several films where they sort of show this aspect where Kennedy is meeting with the Big Six. Kennedy did, in fact, tell them that they were taking it too far. All right. So the Big Six did make it peaceful and orderly. This is considered historically accurate, even though people felt like Malcolm was quote unquote jealous of Martin. He was in fact correct. The march was being co-opted. Kennedy worked behind the scenes with Roy Wilkins and A. Philip Randolph. He was concerned about the original, more radical plans of Black people to just show up and shut it down. And now we have a generation that has that same energy, that they're ready to show up and shut things down. And we're going to see who is going to try to intervene to co-opt that energy and turn it into something more reform based rather than revolution. When he began to talk about the house Negro versus the field Negro, this sociological analysis holds true to today. There are still Black people trying to seek white approval for Black revolution, and it will never happen. Malcolm X was addressing the logical anger and distrust of the power structures. That's what he was addressing. And so the question comes, or what is seen, right? Because we have the benefit of time and we have the benefit of 2020, right? Being able to look back. He was essentially trying to let people know that the movement was being managed by the same forces that it was trying to change. The movement was being managed by the same forces that it was trying to change. And so then the question becomes, are you being managed or are you moving forward? Black people. Are you being managed or are you moving forward? Last book for today. These are the messages of MLK. This is entitled Strength to Love. And we're going to hear what Coretta has to say about his messages. And I will say this. We have so much more, or I will say this way. The wisdom that we can take from all of these people who led is what they didn't have in real time. We can now look back at how the power structures played our leaders. We can now look back at the games that they played. We can now look back at the fox and the wolf tactics and learn from them and hopefully not make the same mistakes, because these people have not changed. It's just a new generation. It's a new decade, but they haven't changed. And so we would do well to study what actually happened and what went down. This is from Coretta Scott King. If there is one book Martin Luther King Jr. has written that people consistently tell me has changed their lives, it is Strength to Love. I believe it is because this book best explains the central element of King's philosophy of nonviolence, his belief in a divine, loving presence that binds all life. This belief was the force behind all of my husband's quest to eliminate social evil and what he referred to when he preached of the interrelated structure of reality in his sermon, The Man Who Was a Fool. All men are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be, and you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. King's theological belief in the interdependence of all life tied to methods for social change that dignified the humanity of the social change advocate as well as his adversary. Christ gave us the goals, he would often say, and Gandhi provided the tactics. It was in his first post as minister of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Alabama that King Jr. first actively combined theology with social change. When the now legendary 381-day nonviolent bus boycott began in 1955, Martin was chosen head of its organizing network, the Montgomery Improvement Association. Even then, his vision transcended time and space. He articulated for us not only the boycott's immediate goal, the desegregation of city buses, but more importantly, showed us its ultimate goal of healing and regenerating an entire population. The basic conflict is not really over the buses, yet we believe that if the method we use in dealing with equality in the buses can eliminate injustice within ourselves, we shall at the same time be attacking the basis of injustice, man's hostility to man. This can only be done when we challenge the white community to re examine its assumptions as we are now prepared to re examine ours. Non cooperation and nonviolent resistance were means of stirring and awakening moral truths in one's opponents, of evoking the humanity that Martin believed existed in each of us. The means, therefore, had to be consistent with the ends. And at the end, as Martin conceived it, was greater than any of its parts, greater than any single issue. The end is redemption and reconciliation, he believed. The aftermath of nonviolence is the creation of the beloved community, while the aftermath of violence is tragic bitterness. Even the most intractable evils of our world, the triple evils of poverty, racism, and war, that Martin so eloquently challenged in his Nobel lecture, can only be eliminated by nonviolent means. And the wellspring for the eradication of even these most economically, politically, and socially entrenched evils is the moral imperative of love. In his 1967 address to the anti war group Clergy and Laity Concerned, he said, when I speak of love, I am not speaking of some sentimental and weak response. I'm speaking of that force which all of the great religions have seen as the supreme unifying principle of life. Love is somehow the key that unlocks the door which leads to ultimate reality. This Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Buddhist belief about ultimate reality is beautifully summed up in the first epistle of St. John. Let us love one another, for love is of God, and every one that loveth is born of God and knoweth God. If love is the eternal religious principle, King believed, then nonviolence is its eternal worldly counterpart. At the center of nonviolence stands the principle of love. The nonviolent resistor would contend that in the struggle for human dignity, the oppressed people of the world must not succumb to the temptation of becoming bitter or indulging in hate campaigns. To retaliate in kind would do nothing but intensify the existence of hate in the universe. Along the way of life, someone must have sense enough and morality enough to cut off the chains of hate. This can only be done by projecting the ethic of love to the center of our lives. Just as Martin sought the integration of the eternal and the temporal, he sought the integration of spiritual and the intellectual. In the sermon Love in Action, he preached that one day we will learn that the heart can never be totally right if the head is totally wrong. Only through the bringing together of the head and heart, intelligence and goodness, shall man rise to a fulfillment of his true nature. To rise to this, Martin believed to not only took not only the integration of the eternal and the temporal, or the spiritual and intellectual, but most deeply the integration of the visionary and the practical. If King was an apostle of love, he was no less an apostle of action. The fierce urgency of now stood as his cardinal impetus for social change. His friends and co-workers in the movement still joke about Martin's seeming impatience at their extended all-night discussions that could bog down action itself. King would tease about the paralysis of analysis. At heart, though, he was deadly serious. In The Trumpet of Conscience, he wrote, in a world facing the revolt of ragged and hungry masses of children, in a world torn between the tension of East and West, white and colored, individualists and collectivists, in a world whose cultural and spiritual power lags so far behind her technological capabilities, that we live each day on the verge of nuclear co-annihilation. In this world, nonviolence is no longer an option for intellectual analysis. It is an imperative for action. And so we come full circle. The struggle to eliminate the world's evils, evils so flagrant and self-evident that they glare at us from every ghetto street and rural hovel, can only occur through a profound internal struggle. By reaching into and beyond ourselves and tapping the transcendent moral ethic of love, we shall overcome these evils. Love, truth, and courage to do what is right should be our own guideposts on this lifelong journey. King showed us the way, he showed us the dream, and we responded with full hearts. Martin was an optimist. I am too. I do believe that one day our strength to love shall bring the dream to fruition and the beloved community to earth. And so, as one person said, and I'm going to end with this, by the time they passed, Martin had become Malcolm and Malcolm had become Martin. Some of Martin's last interviews that, of course, have been released, but at the time they were not released, was him saying, I fear that I have integrated my people into a burning house, a burning building. And so, as we continue to have this discussion about Malcolm and Martin and Medgar, I want you to hear the themes. Hear the themes. And I know we are way past time, and unfortunately, I'm not going to do a talk back today, but we will do a talk back on Tuesday. So if you want to tune into that talk back Tuesday, you can catch us on our YouTube channel at Life Nation KC. We're going to be there all week, but I'll do the talk back on this on Tuesday because I know it's a lot to process. I want you to think about these themes, okay? Number one, the theology of love is supposed to be the foundation for a successful movement. But I also want you to consider, what if you are fighting from a moral ground and you're fighting people who have no morals? You're fighting people who neither believe in good or evil, but who embody it. You're fighting people who no longer believe in humanity because they're so busy trying to build an unhuman world through technology. So you have to recognize that some of the tactics that we may have used in the past are going to have to go through another revamping to understand that you are up against people who do not believe in the brotherhood of humanity. Some of these people do not believe in humans. Some of these people want 99% of the human population to simply not exist. That is a different kind of framework, a different kind of enemy than just somebody who doesn't get along with you because they don't like the kind of human you are. There are some people who don't like humans, period. And those are the people in the billionaire class that would just as soon as incinerate you and fling your incinerated ashes out into the universe if it would get them another $1 billion. So we have to understand that. All right. Other thing I want you to think about as we continue these readings is the strong will to erase the grassroots, to erase the grassroots, to erase the small hands, to erase the small givers, to erase organizing, to erase the minute details, to erase the people that we don't always hear about on the forefront. Other themes that I have heard as I just sort of began to read through these: love for God. And if you don't believe in God, you can still be a part of the movement because you hopefully have love for self, love for your people, love for all people, love for the truth that can produce a free world. All right. This has been another episode of Daring Dialogues, and I've been your reader today, Shantae Charles. I hope that you will take a moment to share this broadcast. If you're watching live by YouTube, the broadcast does take 24 hours 24 hours to process, but you can see the same broadcast on my Facebook page, Black Table Talk. If you're on Black Table Talk, please share this video, but know that it does disintegrate in 30 days, and you can always find it on my YouTube page at Life Nation KC under season 18 of Daring Dialogues. All right. I know this was a lot to read, but I wanted to set a better, greater foundation of all three of these men. And we will continue to have the conversation all throughout the week. I'll be putting up and posing some questions to those of you who can feel free to answer. Remember, light is the most daring opposition to evil. So go out and be light. Take care, everyone. Thank you for listening, viewing, and tuning in today.